And we're going to move right ahead and jump into Ed Boehm's talk. Ed has a multi-generational presence in the gemstone industry, and we're going to try and get him more involved with us so he works harder to preserve some of the crystals that he has seen. He's going to give us a true insider's view from his decades of travels in the gemstone industry down in Brazil. Ed.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to show presentations here. So let's see, I got to get this out of here. And I have luckily been involved in collecting minerals since I was about 6 years old. Largely because of the fact that Bill Larson used to send me minerals from my grandfather gifted me, and I kind of got into it that way and have had that bug in me ever since. So I do really appreciate minerals and preserving them as much as possible. So like I said, I'm lucky enough to have an appreciation for minerals, but my real focus is on gemstones. I'm going to try and bring in as much gemstone information as possible and bring you kind of that passion that we have in our part of the world, and also give you some valuations that you may not hear about normally because you're more exposed to the mineral part of it. So just some basic history. Pull out my glasses here. Brazil, has been a major source of tourmaline for about 500 years, and Minas Gerais is one of the most important areas, as we know. So my focus is going to be more on the eastern part of Minas Gerais, with the population of 21 million. It's about the size of California and Florida combined, and obviously produces many different gem materials that we all are familiar with. Despite stringent environmental laws, in the past decade, the region has experienced renewed activity, largely due to the tremendous increase in demand particularly from China and the rest of global, Europe and the United States and China are really the biggest consumers. Belo Horizonte is the capital of the state of Minas, which many of you are familiar with. The three primary trading centers are Valadares, Teofilo Otoni, and of course Belo Horizonte. Much of the gemstone cutting is going on in those areas as well. So as a gem dealer, we like to go to the mines, we like to experience the mines. Most of the production and most of the purchasing goes on in these cutting areas and dealing centers rather than at the mine. Eastern portion, as I mentioned, is characterized, is the area we're going to focus on. It's characterized by late Neoproterozoic Cambrian Arasuai origin. And that, like we heard earlier, it's between 630 and 480 million years old. So basically 500 to 520 million year old pegmatites, which is really awesome to be able to say to a customer, here's your gemstone from this area of Brazil, and it's likely to be about 500 million years old. These gem quality minerals were initially recovered as a byproduct, as we heard from Tom's talk, of many different rare earth elements, but mostly in the early days, feldspar and lepidolite mining feldspar was being used as a flexing agent for ceramic and glass manufacturing, and of course lepidolite for lithium, lubricants, batteries, and cell phones. The village of Cruzeiro, we're going to start with that area because the Cruzeiro mine is really the most famous, most productive mine today. The Jonas mine is probably the single most famous mine, obviously, because of the pocket and what you're going to hear later about. So we're not going to cover those areas that are already being covered by other people. But this is kind of an interesting shot. You see the mode of transportation for many people there. There's a cross there at the top. That's where this little village gets its name. And it's really interesting to see how things work there. You can be in a vehicle or you can be on horseback and you can see people on cell phones. The same thing happens, you'll probably hear from Monty Zychek, that you can be at a mine site in Colombia and you can see all these dealers with cell phones calling back to Bogota or wherever in the world talking about what's being found, and people just come in quickly now. It's a whole different world when you find a new pocket somewhere of a gem material, and the communication is immediate, and they've leapfrogged beyond traditional land lines. Anyway, it's about 1,200 meters high in the Serra Safira Ridge area. The Cruzeiro mine is likely the source of the green tourmalines thought to be emeralds back in the 17th century discovered by Portuguese conquistadors. The Cruzeiro and Pederneira mine are very close to each other. They're approximately a 3 to 4 hour drive north of Valadares. Valadares, by the way, is fairly easy to get to. You fly from Rio to Belo and then get to Valadares. Valadares and then get to Belo. Here you have a picture of a very big, you can see, I don't know if you can see that person standing right there, but right there is a person. There's the big pegmatite. So we heard earlier from Tom how big these pegmatites can get. The Cruzeiro mine was rediscovered in 1914, but was really not operational as a commercial mine until the 40s, when the U.S. was mining mica during World War II, being used for strategic electronics components and even lightweight heat-resistant fuselage insulation. In the 50s, the Neves brothers began mining tourmaline. Jules Sauer, who's a very famous individual in Brazil, a company named Amsterdam Sauer, bought the mine from the brothers and operated it for about 15 years before he sold it back. So here's a gem guy who wanted to buy a mine but ended up selling it back, because that's often what you're going to see is these gem people, they have this illusion about how gem mining is going to be this easy way for them to get gem materials, and many of us know, like Bill Larson, that that's not necessarily always the case. Sadly, in 1992, both brothers and Jose's wife were killed in a plane crash, and Antonio's wife Beatrice took over the operation of the mine, bringing her son Antonio Jr. and Jose's son Douglas. I mention this because it's a female-operated mine, so not many women are running mines, particularly in places like Brazil. So you see that as that's starting to happen more, and more women are getting involved in mining and geology and in these areas as well. The Cruzeiro mine pegmatites are enormous, reaching up to 50 meters in width, kilometer in length, and production currently comes from 4 pegmatites and a smaller, newer one that was discovered between 1 and 2. They just call them number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. And that's just a photo of me after. I think that was after we were already climbing in there, that kind of out of place. But here you can see about 150 to 200 feet down. You can look up and see how deep we're down, and you're climbing ladders. So you can see there's a ladder right in front of him and another ladder that kind of goes up right up in here, and then another one that goes up there, and then you're just going up to these different segments where you're getting to a flat level, and you have a break, and then you get on another ladder, come down, and you're just kind of pivoting. And it's typical of many mines that you see, even in Burma. It's the same thing in Africa. Garnet mines in Africa, ruby and sapphire mines in Burma. That's how many of the miners get down into these areas without advanced, lift systems. Here's a typical pegmatite at Cruzeiro and Pocket. You see all the feldspar around with the frozen shoal tourmaline crystals. Some crystals that you see will have the dark top and termination, and beneath will have a lot of color, but in this case these are just black shoal, opaque. Here's the size of one of the pockets that we were able to look at. Much of the material had been removed already, but this is Odulio Mara, who is a geologist for Paul Wild Company, and one of my friends, who took me on a tour of many of these different mines. Here's some amazing crystals. These are, they're this big, like the size of a Coke can. See the green? You can see the green on the end of that one, which was almost black. It's opaque green. So the Cruzeiro mine produces approximately 8 tons, that's a rough figure, of tourmaline annually. Green represents about 50%, pink and red about 30%, blue about 10%, and multicolor about 10%. And out of that, only about 10% is facet grade. So a very small portion of that is actually facet grade. And then once you get to the facet grade, of course, what's your percentage of recovery from the rough to the facet ending cut gem, which is about 20 to 40%. If you're lucky, it's 40%, but on average, it's probably about 20% yield. The rough is washed and sorted in the mine, and then it's transported to their cutting facility 40 kilometers away. This is Douglas Neves, who's pretty much running the operation there on the ground with some very large crystals with green termination. And you can get things like these bicolors. And this old piece that was a photo that Bill had loaned me that's an old bicolor from there with a dragon carved in the surface. And of course you get these amazing crystals like this. So only 10% of the material, and these are approximations, but these are numbers given to us by the mine operators, actually come out as specimen quality. So of all that you're talking about, it's a very, very small amount that could be even specimen quality. And of course, many of those have to be repaired. Here's one from Gene and Rosmeiren on the left, and then on the right is the one that's the image for this particular conference. That's one of Rob's. Here's an unbelievable green. I mean, look at that color. So it was really famous for green at the beginning, but today probably more famous for rubellite. Here's a cut stone. I included this because this has a classic Portuguese cut, which you see often in Brazilian stones, and all stones coming from Brazil pretty much have this unique cutting style that we can attribute to their unique style of cutting that works with these gems, particularly with tourmaline. So these are typical colors being produced. Prices of finished cut gems have really increased considerably in the last decade. So 10 years ago, rubellite might have gone for $150 to $200 a carat, and today we're looking at more like $350 to $750 a carat. It actually went up considerably, up to even $1,000 a carat, but that was much more for cleaner material coming from Nigeria. Green tourmaline was going for $75 to $150 a carat. Today it's $250 to $500 a carat, maybe more, if it's a really rich emerald kind of green. And then indicolite was probably trading around $250 to maybe $500 a carat. Today it's $500 to $1,000, even $1,500 a carat. So the prices have dramatically increased. And if you're looking at these prices of mineral specimens and you say to yourself, wow, look at that piece, it's so expensive. But if you try and cut out of it and you add that, it's worth maybe $500,000 a carat. So the gem material can often be more expensive, but in some cases it's less expensive, particularly when you're looking at the Pederneira mine, which we're going to go to next. So the Pederneira mine, which was discovered in the 40s, this mine is famous for these slender, long pencil tourmaline crystals. Most of you are familiar with that, but I'm trying to also appeal to the people that are new, particularly some of the young people, and understand that these they're more valuable. They're considered more valuable as specimens than as cut stones, which is really important in preserving these minerals, which has been done very well by Danny Trinchillo and his partners, and they've added a great deal of prestige to this mine. And we just covered that part of it. Many of these have been broken over millennia, either from tectonic activity or pocket that's ruptured like Tom was talking about, or from blasting during the recovery period. So unrepaired specimens are extremely rare. So if you hear that it's repaired, don't be surprised. That's extremely rare to find one that's unrepaired, and particularly in these long, slender crystals. It's about a 12-kilometer drive from Cruzeiro to Pederneira. There's a thick forest of large ferns that you can drive through that's unbelievable, like being on another planet. That whole region is beautiful. I highly recommend anybody that wants to go and travel. It's not so difficult to get around. A lot of paved roads leading up to the main areas, and then you have to get off, and go off-road. But it's doable, particularly if you're not there during any of the rainy season. There's a landing strip near the mine that actually came in very handy for the owners and transporting equipment. So it's extremely rare to have a landing strip next to a gem mine, a mineral mine. That's very unique. But Danny and his crew managed to make that happen. Here's the mine camp. I just think this is really fascinating because you don't see this kind of organization in many of the camps, but it does give you an idea how things work. And just quickly, you can see the Dada portal up here. That's one of the pegmatites, and the Dilo portal there, and there's the main house. And one thing that I find really great is that they have a garden here and a garden here on either side of the main house. And they have a chef, a cook, not a chef, but a cook that's there, and apparently she's very appreciated by the miners. And anyway, kind of gives you an overview of that. There's the crew, and they have some high-tech equipment that they're using there, some very modern machinery. This is really an advanced mine for this area. Most of the mining that's going on in Brazil is artisanal mining, so this is considered very advanced. There's a core drill there for sampling, and there's Danny next to some of the samples, which helped them, immensely in figuring out where they needed to progress and looking for these gem pegmatites. So here, just at the top, you have the Dada, and at the bottom you have the Dilo pegmatites, and then here's an example. This is all in the article in the Min record as well. But I just wanted to show you. Look at the number of gem pegmatites that were hit in the Dada, and gem pockets that were hit in the Dada pegmatite. So you've got all these very famous ones. KK's pocket is the first one up there on the A, all the way through V, which is just amazing. So very highly successful mine. That's not always the case. Taking out some of the ore. Here's Danny showing the Afghan pocket that was found in the Dada mine in 2014, big pocket. And then some of the pencil crystals that we were talking about. This one on the left is from the Porcupine pocket. There's a beautiful indicolite one that many of you saw last night at the Perot Museum. Next to that incredible pocket that was also recreated there with many indicolite crystals. The one on the right is called the Cranberry Crown. 19 centimeter long crystals, incredible. Some more of the Big Blue with 35 centimeters long. And then a blue-green cap on Clevelandite. And here's one of the most famous, the Rocket. So this is an example of where you could cut some incredible gems out of this one crystal, but of course you would never do that unless you were just, a gem dealer that didn't care. So it is important for people to be cognizant of the fact that these things need to be preserved. The Brazilians are really good at it. The Asian market is getting better at it, thanks to people like Bill that travel to Burma and teach them how to do that. Afghanistan has gotten really good at it. So it's improving a lot, and so we have to really just be careful about understanding the difference between what should be cut into gem material and what should not. And the fact that many people are willing to spend more money on these amazing specimens is really helping that cause. There's a piece from Will Larson's collection. This piece is in the Houston Museum of Natural Science, so if you're there, you can go see that. It's incredible on quartz. And like I said, the article on the Pederneira mine in the Min record is phenomenal. It's from January, February 2015, volume 46, number 1. Many of you get the Min record, but it's just a reminder to those that this is a great article to read. And here's some of the gems. So there are gems that get cut from this mine. It's not all being preserved as mineral specimens. You have some very large ones, a 20-carat indicolite, a 38-carat cat's eye, and a green veridite, 11-carat. Again, these are priced according to what I was saying earlier. An indicolite today can be as much as $1,500 a carat. A green, probably more in the $350 to $500 a carat range. And a cat's eye that big is extremely rare. So that's priced at pretty much whatever you want. Rubellite from this area is the most famous right now because even though they're producing more green, the green isn't as popular as rubellite is right now, particularly in China. So much of that is going to China. This rubellite has a slight hint of orange to it, whereas the Nigerian material does not. So it's competing with Nigerian material color-wise, but in the right lighting conditions, it looks amazing. It's very warm, not cold. Just to quickly mention, the Golconda mine was reopened in 2017 and produced some top specimens like the one pictured here. I think that's Bill Larson's, Bill Larson collection. And then, in 1961, it produced almost a ton of emerald green tourmaline rough. So a lot of these old mines are being reopened, or at least the attempt is there to reopen because of all the demand that we're getting from China, which has softened a bit now, admittedly. But it's going to come back. It's just a small period of slowdown, and I feel strongly that it's going to come back, and even stronger when it does come back. The Arasuai Salinas district is an area that has been mined and very famous, particularly in the 70s and 80s, and according to many very knowledgeable and influential people, dealers down in Brazil, they're saying that there's going to be a lot more production there in the near future. One of the most productive tourmaline mines there in the past was one known as the Pederneira mine in the Piauí River area, and that's apparently starting to produce again. And also included this Gerd Dreher piece. Patrick Dreher is here, for those of you who haven't seen him. This is a piece that was cut from an old tourmaline that had, obviously multi-colors, and just incredible. And Patrick has a book out now on carvings, and many of the pieces are from the Arasuai region in Brazil. Also, these teal color tourmalines are coming out. I have a box that will be on display tonight that'll show you a bunch of these teal color tourmalines. They're not copper bearing, but they're very pretty and come very close to some of the Paraíba colors that you see in the other parts of Brazil. And speaking of which, where we have really little to no production for Batalha, there's still some production coming from Malungu and Alto dos Quintos in the Rio Grande do Norte state. You're going to hear a lot more about that from Brian Cook, so I'm not going to really go into that. Paraíba tourmaline is obviously the most expensive tourmaline that exists. The material that has that Windex blue, like the trillion on the left, depending on the size, can go anywhere from 30 to 100,000 a carat. So that's kind of the price range that we're looking at. And 5 carat to, anything up to 20 carat if you can get it. Material coming from Mozambique is a little different. We'll talk about that in a second. But that's kind of where things are today with Paraíba tourmaline. So it's pretty spectacular. So large-scale stone mining, there are about 47 primary colored gemstone producing countries in the world. And of those, approximately 20% of all colored stones come from these large-scale mining operations like Tanzanite 1 here, which just is shutting down. So a lot of them are not really being able to continue in some areas. Some others are, like Gemfields is doing a lot of mining in Zambia and starting to enter other countries as well, particularly Mozambique, with ruby mining. But artisanal and small-scale mining represents 80% of all colored gemstone production. So we really have to focus on that type of mining and how that affects our business and how it affects the overall gem mining community. And it's important to be able to understand the difference between these two. They're both valuable, but we want to keep, as an industry, if we want to have any kind of future, we have to support these artisanal miners. And it's an important part of their development and also just the growth of those developing countries. And of course, 90% of those small artisanal mining operations are located in these developing countries. So Nigeria is a classic example of that. This is a map of all the different gem types of deposits you're getting from Nigeria. We're going to focus on tourmaline from the Oyo and the Ekiti area right here in this region, the southwestern part of Nigeria. Just to give you, it's an overall just quick update on some of the things. They began really producing coal, tin, and columbite in the 40s, but modern gemstone mining really took off in the 80s and 90s in Nigeria. Most of the top rubellite tourmaline in the world is coming from the Oyo state, and I just pointed that out. The rubellite from there doesn't need any kind of treatment. Some of the Brazilian material needs some treatment, but nothing from Nigeria seems to need any treatment, and it's a really beautiful red color, and it has very little secondary. In 2006, there were government initiatives together with the World Bank that created what they called the Sustainable Management of Solid Mineral Resources Project, which focused on reforming mining and tax laws and creating incentives for artisanal small-scale mining and so forth, and particularly also for setting some standards for environmental management and remediation. The same thing has been going on in other countries like Madagascar, for example. The problem is that when you have a regime change, all this money that the World Bank provides for these projects then somehow can miraculously disappear. So it's kind of unfortunate, but the effort's there and these projects are ongoing, and every time you have a new project like this, people learn more about environmental concerns and being able to try and preserve their future in gemstone mining. Here's just the Pederneira colored material that comes from Nigeria. This is a very large 61 karat gem that our company recently sold. Material like this goes for somewhere between $20,000 and $25,000 a carat. So it's not up, if you had a 61 karat from Brazil, from Pederneira, then it would be, who knows, I haven't ever seen one that big in this color. But they do exist, of course, from Nigeria, and Mozambique has also very large gem crystals that allow you to cut big stones as well. Currently, there's tourmaline production occurring in numerous localities in Nigeria. In the Akampa mining area in Calabar State, large quantities of white colorless tourmaline are found together with many other different colors, including some small cuprian material. And then in the share mine area of the Kwara State, you have a lot of indicolite. And these are big open pit operations. They're not tunnel mines like some of the ones we saw in Brazil. Most of these areas, these artisanal mines, are open pit operations with individuals working either as a group together or just have their own individual pit. There's some mining going on in Ekiti State, which is just recently producing some amazing green tourmalines. And then we got Mozambique, the Mavuco mine area in Alta Lagonia, which is famous, of course, for many different tourmalines. You got all the different natural colors there on the right. It's Brendan Lars, who has published many different articles in G&G and the Journal of Gemmology. Having some fun there. And here, again, open pit mining, just to give you some examples of what it's like there. It's a completely different environment. Even though some of the geology is very similar, the environment of mining is very different. You have to move up to 5 meters of laterite overburden to get to the gem-bearing gravel layer. And here's an example of a Pederneira type tourmaline from there. It's a 100 karat stone. Material from there is less expensive because it's not quite as intense most of the time as material from Brazil. And even Nigeria has sometimes more intense color. But you do get stones like this in this beautiful necklace that actually my wife designed and made. Material is probably running somewhere between 10 and 15,000 a carat from that area. But you get bigger sizes and beautiful, beautiful lighter color. Namibia is again producing material. We know of Namibia, famous from Neuschwaben and Ochua and Usakos. But new material is coming out again, particularly from the Usakos mine, which produced the fine quality blue tourmalines discovered in late 2000. I'm going to try and move a little faster here because we're looking at, there's a big, huge pegmatite there, the Chua mine. Usakos was originally exploited for zinc by the Germans during World War I, and many drums of tourmaline byproduct were left at the mine when it was deserted. And these later made their way to Germany in the hands of an enterprising Idar Oberstein jeweler. We've heard this story many times, over and over. And it was cut into, the rough was cut many years later. And this particular jeweler also learned how to heat treat darker material, which the Germans have really made material from Namibia famous. Today, you're getting up to 2,000 $3,000 a carat for some of the really, really fine blue-green material. Here's a pocket on the left that was secured with some boulders to keep anybody from getting into it overnight. And on the right, you have a guy named Johannes Brunner, who is the mine foreman and operator of the Usakos mine. So there's new material coming out of there. Much of it looks like this. Some of it looks like this. Just incredible, beautiful stuff. Oh, these are preforms. And here's some, that's a preforms on the left and some faceted material on the right that range from about 3 carats up to 15 carats. And just an example of that. So the pegmatites there we heard are much younger. They're 120 million years old approximately, but the formations are very similar. And it's really amazing to see that it's just a matter of the landscape. So it's easy to find pegmatites there. They're exposed. To see them on the surface like this. And so big open pit mining operations do exist there. There's not enough equipment going in, there's not enough foreign investment going in, but there are new operations happening. There is some investment coming from Germany, and there's one guy, a very young guy, who's doing some mining, and this is his mine, the Ochakachungo mine. And his name is J.B. Sinoble. Here's a big sorting machine that he brought in for sorting some of the colluvial. Not sure how successful that's been yet, but he keeps trying, and he has found beautiful material. Here's a little trailer with a mining camp nearby that we were at. And I thought many of you mineral dealers would appreciate this mineral stand near Spitzkoppe in the Orongo Mountains. Mostly just shoal tourmaline crystals, but there were some other interesting things too. And look she's got her hut there that she would stay in when nobody was driving by. So very, very primitive in some of those areas. So, Ouro Preto is the famous area for topaz, obviously, and many of you are familiar with that. And again, I'm sure this is repetitive for many, but for some people that are here, this is new information. That name comes from black gold, named for the blackened nuggets of gold that were found during the gold rush of 1698. It was the capital of Minas Gerais from 1823 to 1897, and this was an unbelievable growth period in architecture and Baroque and Rococo architecture in that area. So Ouro Preto is this beautiful, beautiful town, and it's recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, so it's preserved. It's also home to the School of Mines there, which was established in 1876, and of course contributed greatly to the success of the mining in that region. The gold is gone, but the area produces, of course, the finest golden tourmaline to imperial orangey red to red topaz. Sorry, tourmaline, I said topaz in the world. And the name imperial topaz was originally used in the 18th century to describe pink topaz from Russia, and this material was reserved exclusively for the Tsar of the imperial family. And today, imperial topaz refers more to pink, red, and orangey red material in the overall marketplace. In Brazil, imperial topaz was first discovered around 1760. It was found in heavily decomposed chloritic schist, and the crystals are formed in graphic phyllites, foliated metamorphic slate, and itabirites, which are iron-rich formations, which have weathered to a brown clay lateritic soil, which is kind of the overburden. The deposits are along about a 25-kilometer east to west belt that passes through Ouro Preto. There are numerous topaz mines in the region. So there's some very famous ones you're all familiar with, but there are numerous small ones, and I'm going to show you some pictures of one particular small one. The Vermilion mine is probably one of the most famous, and then the Capodolana mine is probably the most productive, and is now closed, but it was the most productive historically. Numerous artisanal mines have popped up, like I mentioned, and largely because there's still a great deal of demand from the United States and Europe, and China has also entered into this arena of appreciating these red topaz crystals and gems. And here's some just general pictures of the Capodolana mine. It's a dragline operation where topaz-bearing gravel was transported by hydraulic washing up to the hydraulic washing plant using this big bucket and a line. Not very advanced in its mining, but really productive. And there were so many topaz crystals that were found. Most of them, though, are more of that golden color. So you don't get as much of the red and the sherry colored as you do the golden. Some of this is just repetitive. Topaz is formed in hydrothermal veins, along with hematite, rutile, pyrite, and euclase. Some incredible euclase crystals coming from there, just like you get from Colombia, these blue, gorgeous crystals. And here's a picture of what it looks like now that it's been closed, and they filled in the area where you've got the lake, and they actually have fish there now. This is the old washing area. So when you're in Brazil and you're at these mine locations, again, you're not really getting to purchase gem materials there. You're doing most of your buying in offices in the vicinity or in some of the major centers. But many of these families have been collecting specimens for a long time, and you can, if you're lucky, you get into an office and somebody will pull out a bunch of different crystals and gems combined. And we were lucky enough to be able to purchase a lot of these different gemstones that you see here, all of which have sold in the meantime. Here's a picture of some crystals. So some gemological reminders: precious and imperial topaz gets its colors from trace elements of chromium. And topaz has a relatively high hardness. It's 8 on the Mohs scale. Has, unfortunately, one direction of perfect cleavage, which makes it difficult in cutting, and you have to be worried about, hard blows, but everything else gemologically that it has makes up for that. Its relatively high refractive index of 1.61 to 1.63 and its excellent transparency really make it one of the most versatile and desirable gemstones that we have today. We need to promote it more, we need to market it more, particularly in the United States. It's much more well known in Europe than it is in the United States, so we've got to continue to do that. And like tanzanite and chrysoberyl, topaz is biaxial, which means it has 2 optic axes, 3 optical directions through which light travels at different speeds, creating different colors. And blending these colors is an art in and of itself, in the faceting process. And it allows you to produce these amazing, different, varied results, and you can see that in some of the gems that we've seen out, particularly recently, where they're bicolors and they're separating the different colors or blending the yellows and reds together, making beautiful gems. Here's kind of some examples of the range of different colors you can get from the Capao mine and then the Antonio Neri mine, which is also no longer producing. And here's some crystals on matrix from the Vermilion mine. So Vermilion is still producing. That's not commercially producing. There is stuff coming out. Most of it, I think, is actually being taken from the mine. There's not a great deal, but some. Don Bosco, Boa Vista, and Bella Vista are known bigger. They're still artisanal mining, the smaller ones, but they're producing material and going back into Don Bosco. Here's the Bella Vista mine. So there's been some production there, which is enlightening and encouraging that we're going to get some nice crystals I'll show you here in a second. So this is, I'll show you there we go. So Sergio Castro is the owner of this particular mine. I think he has a couple partners, but he's running that mine. And you can see here it's again, an open type pit operation where they're washing the gravel material and finding the crystals as they sort out there at the mine site. And these are 2 examples of pieces that he's recently found. The one on the right is a 96-gram rough, so that's a pretty good size. Only for cutting so far, nothing of collector mineral specimen quality yet. Here's an imperial red topaz that's a good color, not top, but good. Material like this can go for somewhere in the neighborhood of 6,000 to 8,000 per carat today. So that's significant. And 10 years ago, it was maybe 2,500 to 3,000 a carat. So that's the jump that we've seen in pricing value. You can also treat topaz to these beautiful pink colors through heat treatment. It's ironic that some of these heated gems are actually more expensive than their unheated counterparts. It's one of the few times, it's like with Pederneira tourmaline, where you actually have a more expensive gem after heat treatment. In corundum, that doesn't exist. But these are running in the neighborhood of, the one on the left would be approximately, I'd say, 4,000 a carat. So the starting material is not red, it's kind of an orangey color. And then the vivid one on the right, that was a very expensive gem. I think that was more in the neighborhood of about 15,000 a carat. And then we were lucky enough to be involved in the sale of this particular gem, which is called the Whitney Flame now. It's a 48 carat, beautiful red imperial topaz, and is now on display at the Smithsonian, right next to the Hope Diamond. This stone, it was a almost $1 million sale, so that's kind of the top end of where you can get with red imperial topaz. And here's a picture of it in its display case, being held up by a small stand, making it look like it's a flame. So next time you're there, I highly recommend going by there and checking it out. It's right next to the Hope Diamond. And finally, this incredible specimen, which is from an anonymous collection, is just an example of how incredible and beautiful these imperial topazes can be. And I appreciate your time. And if there are any questions later during tonight's dinner, I'll be next to the gem case and be happy to answer any of your questions. So thank you very much for your time.